Hey, how's it going, everybody? Welcome to the show. It's the Future of Freedom. I'm your host, Scott Horton, here for Liberty.me. Otherwise, I'm also the opinion editor of antiwar.com, and I do a radio show where I interview journalists about the wars. And he is my guest, Jacob Hornberger, the founder and the president of the Future Freedom Foundation. Hey, Jacob, how are you?
Hey, Scott. Great to be back with you. Another week, another round.
Yeah, good to be here with you again. And so tonight I thought we would talk a little bit about, well, we could just kind of call it what it is. Let's make fun of Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, these two couple of clowns that running for the Democratic Party nomination right now. All the debate on TV today is who's the real progressive. Sanders obviously is a little further left. So on the face of it, he's the more progressive, I guess. And then, but Hillary says, "Nuh-uh, don't you count me out." And so there's a big fight about it. And I just wonder, well, what do you make of it all?
Well, I find it very humorous as well. I mean, this is really an important subject. The country's going to hell in a handbasket, but we're arguing over who's a progressive or not. And the way the whole thing came up is kind of humorous too. That apparently Hillary's been sort of like running away from the label, because she thinks she's going to be nominated to be the presidential candidate for the Democratic Party. So she wants to reach out to mainstream America. So she doesn't want to be tarred with that label, apparently, of progressive. So she's been calling herself a moderate. And it's pretty funny because Sanders now starts taking her to task and saying, well, why aren't you calling yourself a progressive? And so she's having to come back. And since this is the nomination battle, oh, no, I really am a progressive. And so now they're arguing over whether she is a progressive or isn't a progressive, and bringing up the whole kit and caboodle, the war on Iraq, foreign interventionism, the welfare state. And it's really all quite comical.
Mm-hmm. Well, it has given him a good opening to attack her and say, I saw, a report anyway today that they said that he had responded, well, the progressives I know oppose the Iraq war and but of course support other things that you and I think would certainly disagree with. But so this raises the question, and sure as hell ain't going to get an answer to it watching MSNBC today or CNN. I promise you that, although they did ask it. And that is, well, what is a progressive anyway? And of course, we're both libertarians and we both have our own definitions. But, there's quite a spectrum on the left. Of course, once you get to the socialists and the communists, there are a million different kinds, right? All the different Maoists and Trotskyists and weirdos that you never even heard of before, the different kinds. But there's still a pretty broad spectrum on the left besides that, too, progressive and liberal and whatever. So how do you define those terms, first of all, here?
Yeah, well, first of all, going back to your point about the Iraq war, because that's kind of a funny thing, too, is that Sanders is saying, well, I oppose the Iraq war and you supported the Iraq war, and therefore I'm the genuine progressive because many progressives oppose the Iraq war. Well, let's not forget that President Obama opposed the Iraq war, too, and he's turned out to be a much bigger advocate of the national security state, foreign interventionism, bombing, assassination than his predecessor, the conservative George W. Bush.
Well, I don't know about that. Yeah. I'd call it almost a tie, at least.
Okay. But I mean, whether you oppose or support the Iraq war is not really a litmus test as to whether you're a progressive or not, because a lot of progressives oppose the Iraq war and support foreign interventionism. I mean, just because you have a different selection of regime change targets doesn't make you all of a sudden a non-interventionist. And Sanders, I'm sure, would say, hey, we've got to intervene in countries where our national interests are at stake, which is exactly what the conservatives would say. So, yeah, they may battle over which country really is an important target of regime change, but they all fundamentally believe in the concept of foreign interventionism. And I agree with you. I mean, there's all kinds of variations. You find the same thing in conservatism, which I consider just the flip side of the progressive coin. They all stand for the basic overall philosophy, and that is the welfare warfare state. I mean, we can say a progressive is a socialist and they brought in socialist ideas to America, but I mean, that's really what the welfare state's all about. It's about a socialist concept where the government effectively owns not the means of production as it does like in Cuba, but where the government owns the results of production, which is people's income. And that's where the IRS comes in. The IRS decides how much you're going to be able to keep and how much the government's going to take from you. And so effectively with the income tax, the entire income of everyone was nationalized. And then they use this money to distribute largesse to the seniors in the form of Social Security, Medicare and Medicaid, and farm subsidies and education grants, and the whole gamut of the welfare state. But then the other side, Scott, is the warfare state, which I consider a much more dangerous, grave infringement on liberties. And the progressives brought that into being through Harry Truman, the president in the late 1940s. The welfare state, of course, was brought in by Franklin Roosevelt, a progressive. And so the national security state has brought us the Cold War, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the whole anti-communist crusade, Iraq, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Syria, ISIS, and on and on and on. So when you look at the two main features of American governmental system that really are at the root of all the crises we face in America, that's what progressivism is for me. It's the welfare state and the warfare state.
Yeah. Well, my favorite thing about it is just the question begging in the title, right? And the assumption baked right into the entire concept that progress for mankind, one way or the other, must be accomplished through state means. Period. It's assumed right from the very premise. But so here's the thing about it, though. And this may just be me, but I think I learned this from leftists pretty much, that, you know, a liberal to me is basically just a Democrat, which means they would rationalize, you know, Obama cutting a baby's throat with his own, you know, his own self, if that meant helping to support the Democratic Party. They don't give a damn about any principles at all, really, other than beat the Republicans, the other side. Whereas a progressive actually believes in some things, which typically makes them better, maybe even much better, on civil liberties issues and on foreign policy. And of course, don't get me wrong, they're worse on economics. They're closer and closer to socialist and communist on economics. But just because they define themselves in opposition to the status quo, the status quo right now is conservatism and nationalism and empire. And so they think, well, hey, I guess I'm the opposite of that. So other than the libertarians, the only people who are worth a damn at all on war are leftists and progressives, you know, and people who would happily, you know, throw Hillary Clinton under the bus, who despise her as much as they despise George Bush, you know?
Well, to me, Hillary Clinton is just like George Bush. I mean, she may call herself a Democrat, but she would fit just as easily.
I'm just saying to them too. The progressives would agree with you on that, or many of them.
There's some very interesting attacks from the left against Hillary, and the fact that Bernie got, you know, effectively half the votes in Iowa is fascinating, and it really is interesting to read some of the leftist websites like, you know, Alternet and Counterpunch and stuff, and see the attacks from the left on Hillary. In fact, one of the most interesting ones I read today was not an endorsement of Bernie, but pretty close. It was analyzing why Bernie would be a better candidate, and they talked about the nation's endorsement of Sanders. And the Nation, of course, is a famous liberal magazine, progressive magazine. Well, in that article, it said that Sanders had come out against regime change operations overseas, that he was in favor of establishing friendly relations with Russia, that he was questioning the foreign interventionism, that some of the foreign interventionism. And I find that very interesting because that's coming from the left, and that's pretty much what we libertarians believe. And as you know,
although that's really oversimplified, and you know, his real record is not so sterling. You know, he was bad on Kosovo and bad on Afghanistan, good on Iraq, sort of kind of good on Libya, although he didn't have a chance to be bad on it, really. And right now his position on the Islamic State is completely ludicrous, which is have the Saudis who back the Islamic State fight against them for us with some invisible army that they don't have, since our field army is the Saudis' field army, obviously.
Yeah, I don't want to suggest that this guy is some kind of principled leftist on
Oh
foreign
yeah, I'm sorry.
policy.
I didn't mean to really contradict you. I
Yeah.
just want to say for the record,
No, I'm
he is
glad you
kind of a
did.
bastard.
I'm glad you did because I'm not really familiar with all the details of his beliefs, but it seems to me that he's your standard statist, interventionist, and so forth.
Yeah.
But I guess the point I want to make is that there are some people on the left, many more on the left than on the right, who make the principled case that libertarians make on a non-interventionist foreign policy and against imperialism. As you know, we've had some conferences. We had two conferences in 2007, 2008, and where we invited liberals to deliver the principal case on foreign policy.
Well,
They're not
leftists,
libertarians.
right? Don't call Alex Coburn a liberal because he's a leftist, right? The
Well,
liberals are the ones who don't believe anything,
okay. Well,
But
however
so
you
that's what I
define it.
mean, though, right? Like the liberals love Hillary, the progressives love Bernie, and he's a shade to the left of her on everything for good or ill, basically, is what's going on, right?
Yeah, he seems to have a more consistent philosophical worldview in favor of his statist philosophy. Seems to me that Hillary is just this pragmatic, ad hoc, opportunist politician that will do anything to get elected and wield power. And so those people on the left for whom principle matters are gravitating toward Sanders because he seems to be more principled in terms of leftist philosophy. Not purists like you and I are with respect to libertarianism, but he seems to have that deeper philosophical approach as compared to Hillary, who's just whatever I need to do to get elected, I'm going to do.
Yeah. What's funny? You just reminded me of this old quote I completely forgot about, Jacob, that I saw Hillary on TV. I don't know if it was in 08 or maybe it could have been when she was running for re-election of the Senate in 06 or I don't know what. But I think it may have been 06. And someone was asking her, so are you a liberal or a progressive? And she says, oh, I'm a progressive because, the word liberal has the root word liberty, that it comes from that tradition. But I reject that, and I don't believe in that. I'm a proud progressive because I believe that, we need government in order to lift people up and this and that. So she explicitly devoured the label liberal because she didn't want to be confused in the slightest bit with somebody like you who believes that people ought to be free. Because don't make that mistake about me, she said. I don't believe that for a minute.
That's a fascinating point you make because, as you know, the word liberal once meant a libertarian. And that's why we get the term classical liberal. And really the progressives, the socialists, the interventionists, they stole the word from us. I mean, they corrupted the word so that now when we use the word liberal, we're talking about somebody who favors big government intervention, using the force of government to remake society. And so maybe that's what she was getting at, that she's going back to that old idea of what a liberal is, which is really a libertarian. In fact, in Europe and Latin America, the word liberal still means a libertarian as compared to the big government type that we talk about today.
Yeah. Well, and of course, it really is unfortunate that we get conflated with the conservatives who, they may be a little bit less statist on some business things, but they're certainly, well, I guess to a certain degree, they're trying to conserve that old liberalism, but not so much. It doesn't seem like, really, does it?
Oh, they're disasters. I mean, they're absolute disasters. They love the national security state. I mean, I always talk in terms of two apparatuses, each of which, if we got rid of them, would be a tremendous bonanza for liberty and prosperity. One's the welfare state. One's the national security state, or also known as the warfare state. And conservatives love the second one. I mean, they idolize it. It's really their god. The Pentagon, the CIA, the NSA, and that really is the much bigger threat and infringement on our liberties than the welfare state is. But conservatives, they preach a better game on the welfare state. But when you analyze what, they'll preach the mantras: free enterprise, private property, and limited government. I mean, you'll find that on their stationery and their websites and everything. In their speeches, you'll never hear a conservative speech without hearing free enterprise, private property, and limited government. But when you analyze what they really believe in terms of programs, you realize how nonsensical their mantras are. They favor Social Security. They're ardent believers in it. That's a socialist program. In fact, it's the crown jewel of the welfare state. Medicare, Medicaid, oh yeah, they'll argue over whether Obamacare should be abolished, but they will never, ever call for the repeal of Medicare and Medicaid. They favor farm subsidies, education grants, corporate bailouts. So really, that's why I said earlier that conservatism is really just the flip side of progressivism, because while they may argue over like food stamps or aid to the arts, they fundamentally believe in the confiscate and transfer society, along with the other half of the problem, the warfare state.
All right. Now, so as long as we're mostly focusing on the Democrats and the left, for this one, let me ask you, and especially with Bernie Sanders as, the ascendant insurgent, leftist to Hillary's flank here, I think a fair question for a libertarian to answer when they're attacking the left is, well, what about healthcare? You have an article this week, actually, says healthcare is not a right. And your libertarian point is obvious, that people weren't born owning everyone else, and not everyone owes you a share of their money to pay for whatever it is you need, whether it's healthcare or anything else. Non-aggression principle, textbook case, simple as that. But, says a leftist, or actually basically virtually any American who believes in those programs you just named, you just say that because you're rich and white and healthy and have health insurance. But what about everybody else? They get sick, they should just die because they're poor, or what?
Yeah, that's in fact, there was some interesting debates going on that article on our Facebook page at FFF. And so if anybody's interested, they ought to go take a look at that, because some of the people there, I couldn't tell whether they were leftists, conservatives, libertarians, but they were making these arguments, and they were very cogent arguments. They weren't like attacking. They were really asking the question, like, well, what about the poor? And, the poor actually get smashed in a system
or even,
like this.
The middle class can't afford health care at today's cost.
Right.
You know what I mean?
But notice something important, and this is what I pointed out in that Facebook debate, that all of this crisis where the middle class can't afford it, the poor can't afford it, this is all in the context of socialized health care, specifically Medicare and Medicaid, along with interventionism and regulation that the government massively engages in with respect to the healthcare industry. Let's go back to pre-Medicare and Medicaid. That was like in the 50s. That America had the finest healthcare system in the world, highest standard in terms of healthcare. Doctors absolutely loved what they were doing. And I grew up, Scott, in the poorest city in the United States. That's what the Census Bureau told us in Laredo, Texas, in the 1950s. We were the poorest city in the United States. Every day, I can guarantee you that the doctors' offices were filled in Laredo, filled with people who everybody knew could not pay their bill, or a lot of them could not pay their bill. I never heard of one instance, not one, where any doctor in Laredo turned anyone away because they couldn't pay. They didn't turn away anyone, and they were still among the richest people in town. I think they were second only to the oil people. Why? Because they were making a lot of money off the people who did pay, and they simply believed it was their moral duty to help out the poor, provide free medical services to them, and not worry about it. And my parents, I never remember them talking about soaring healthcare costs and what are they going to do about the doctor's bills. In fact, nobody had insurance. The medical expenses were just like an ordinary cost of living, like going to the grocery store and buying food and so forth. They may have had catastrophic insurance, I don't remember, but in terms of just regular healthcare expenses, none of that was there. And then Medicare and Medicaid come into existence in the 60s, and all of a sudden healthcare costs start soaring. You've got a constant, ever-going healthcare crisis, and everybody's talking about, what are we going to do about the healthcare crisis? What are we going to do? And we libertarians just kept saying, repeal Medicare and Medicaid. That's the root of the problem. Get rid of government involvement. And of course, they did the opposite. They did what Ludwig von Mises said they would do. One intervention leads to another intervention, leads to another intervention, until you finally have full socialized healthcare, which is exactly where we're going to go in terms of Bernie Sanders' vision. when really the solution to this whole morass, Scott, is very simple. Repeal Medicare and Medicaid. It's a cancer on the body politic. Excise that cancer. Just dismantle it and repeal it, and then get rid of all the regulations and the interference. Separate healthcare and the state, the way our ancestors separated religion and the state. If we do that, that solves the healthcare crisis. If we don't do it, be prepared for full socialized medicine like they have in Cuba.
Yeah. Well, you know, the point about the middle of the road leads to socialism, I think, is a great one. You know, as you're saying there, Mises, where each intervention just causes the price to go up and up and up till there's only one man who can afford the cost of all this healthcare. Uncle Sam. He's the only trillionaire available to pick up the bill that he made so high for everyone. And that's the way they do it. Basically, it's just continue to push on and on. But I think it's really important, as you say, also to focus on the regulations, because I mean, the FDA, I think by their own admission, they kill hundreds of thousands of people a year. It's got to be worse than that. And that's just by, you know, calculating when they finally legalize the use of drugs that they've been withholding for whatever extended period of time. And oftentimes even going to battle, trying to do anything they can to thwart dying people from trying their last gasp chance at an experimental drug and this kind of thing. And they're total creeps, completely out of control. And who knows how distorted the costs of pharmaceuticals, even the nature of the pharmaceutical industry, how distorted all of that is because of the FDA and that fascist interference in the marketplace.
Absolutely. And you've also got licensure laws, don't forget, that restrict the supply of healthcare providers, the war against alternative healthcare providers. I mean, if the greatest essay on this was by Milton Friedman and his book, Capitalism and Freedom, where he has an essay there about occupational licensure, and he uses the medical profession because he wanted to take the toughest example. He didn't want to deal with why hairdressers should not be licensed. He took the medical field and said, this is why occupational licensure should be abolished in the medical sphere. And so you've got them controlling the supply side. You've got them controlling the demand side with respect to Medicare and Medicaid. I mean, and then you've got the interventionism in the middle. I mean, how can anybody sit here and scratch their heads and say, I wonder why we have a healthcare crisis? And then the worst part of it is they see this, and what do they call as a solution? They call for more government intervention, more socialism. I mean, that's even worse than doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. It's like you're going to get a worse result because you keep getting a worse result every time you intervene. Right. I'd like to give you one more example of the poor, you know, that we've really lost confidence in ourselves and in people that will take care of others on a voluntary basis. I mean, there's this mindset that the welfare state has produced and inculcated in people that you can't trust other people to take care of others, to donate to the poor, to donate to churches and so forth, even though evidence of that is manifest all around us. But my dentist, he's retired now, but a few years ago, he told me that he and other dentists here in the Northern Virginia area got together because there's no Medicaid for dental care for poor people. There's no government assistance for dental care for poor people. And so, what are people doing? How come nobody's saying, what about dental care for the poor? Notice that nobody's saying that. Well, my dentist, he got together with some other dentists to provide 1 day a week on a rotating basis, free dental care for the poor. Nobody forced them to do it. Nobody harangued them.
In Austin too.
I mean, it's a classic example of what a free market would produce. Multiple doctors and healthcare providers loving what they do again, loving the medical field, and providing free services to those who couldn't afford it. That's what would happen in a free market society, Scott. But we've lost faith in that because of the welfare state.
Yeah, and we've lost the ability to imagine that kind of freedom, I guess, just because of TV and just the consensus that we're all subjected to all the time that makes this kind of thing seem unimaginable. But you make it all very imaginable. Like, hey, Why do we need government schools at all? Why do we need government healthcare at all? Why do we need the military at all? We could just live in a normal country and be free and happy and it'd be fine. And if we want to be afraid, we can go to the horror movie and leave each other alone and it'd be great. And I don't know. Anyway, that's why I like reading your stuff, and that's why I like interviewing you so much, because I think you do such a great job of getting that point across to people that, no, really, you can snap out of it and we can change it.
Yeah.
So thanks again.
I think we're going to do that. I really do think we're going to do it. I think people are questioning, they're challenging, they're going against the establishment. And as long as people are thinking, people like you and me that really have, I think, the solution to get this country back on the right track, we've got a chance to shift things in our direction.
Thanks very much, Jake. Appreciate it.
As always, Scott, thank you very much, and greatly enjoyed the show again.
All right, y'all. That's Jacob Hornberger. He's the founder and the president of the Future Freedom Foundation. I'm Scott Horton, and I'm back here to interview him again next Thursday at 8 o'clock Eastern Time. See ya.